As of 3rd of April, we have had 129 million COVID cases and 2.8 million deaths, yeah? And based on regions from these is the WHO updates, as you can see, no doubt at all, the Americas and European countries have got much higher cases, a lot more cases than we have over at Southeast Asia, but our cases are not little as well. And as you know, a lot of us have had to struggle, change our lives, had to reconfigure, had to re-strategize, reprioritize even, as we learn to live with COVID-19 in the past year or so. In the Philippines, now I got this from actually the Department of Health in the Philippines, and these are the statistics in terms of nationwide COVID cases. We're looking at about 780,000 as of 3rd of April, and 13,000 deaths. And in terms of the epidemic curve that has been happening in the Philippines over the past year, so I think in your country, the first few cases were recorded around the 1st of March. Subsequently, there was slow increase, and then it came down a little bit. But as of the first quarter of this year, we've had seen increase in number of COVID cases again. And the cities in your country, in Philippines, that has had the most number of cases have been Manila, Quezon, yeah. I do apologize if I pronounce any of these, the name of the provinces wrongly. Rizal and Laguna have all recorded 30 over 1,000 cases in total. Okay. Now, an overview about the number of cases, COVID cases in Asia. So Philippines really isn't the only country that had to battle COVID. We've got, India has had, 59,000 cases, and this is just January 2020 to 30, the number of cases per day, and the 7-day rolling average. And this is a 7-day rolling average looking at number of cases per day in each of these countries. So India's had quite a lot of cases. We also see that in Indonesia, Japan. So really, you're not alone in this battle against COVID. Yeah, we all have had to battle this. So global updates in terms of what's been happening, some key, I guess, headlines that I wanted to emphasize on is, as you know, so quarter one was sobering, yeah, because it was something that emerged on our shore and we had to deal with it. A lot of countries went into lockdown. There were travel bans in the quarter one of 2020, right? And we faced escalating cases and deaths, yeah. Then quarter two, 2020, I think there were a lot of businesses, economies were crying because, nothing was happening, yeah. So countries attempted to reopen in quarter two, but only to be met with new clusters, new waves, and they had to re-lock down again. So that was the problem. And also by quarter two, we've exceeded 1 million cases in terms of new COVID cases, yeah? Now, quarter three, we start hearing about Russia's work with the COVID vaccine, and we start hearing about Moderna's agreements to supply COVID vaccine to the United States. And in quarter four, what we hear about is that as we see more and more cases coming, and certainly by then our global death rates have exceeded 1 million. At the same time, concurrent with that, Pfizer and Moderna announces, these made major headlines. I think all of us remember that, 95 very good efficacy rates with their vaccines, okay? And quarter one of this year, everyone is starting to launch vaccination campaigns, yeah? And remarkably so, Israel vaccinates 10% of their population in just 2 weeks, okay? Now, at the same time, we hear about new strains that may evade existing vaccines, and so that's worrying. Now, moving into March and April this year, we start to hear about UK and EU considering vaccine passports, okay? And now the US CDC announces that vaccinated people can travel within the US without testing or quarantine. And that's only just within the US. So these are just some of the interesting headlines, yeah? So in the past year, what we have learned about COVID, the virus itself is relentless, it's very smart, it always seems to be one step ahead, and certainly I think it wants to stay for a while longer if it could, but we're hoping that we can prevent that, yeah? So let's talk about mutations, variants, and strains. So I think in the public domain news, very often we hear about variants and strains being used interchangeably. So just to just to explain it a little bit more, so for viruses, as part of their evolution, it is not uncommon for them to replicate, and they will replicate, but in replicating, sometimes the copying of their original blueprint from the parent virus, there can be some slight mistakes, okay? So when there's a minor mistake, right, whereby there's a slight change in their blueprint, it leads to a new variant. But this new variant, if it's only a minor copying change, may not exhibit very differently from the parent virus. However, a time may come when the new variants accumulate a lot of mutations and may start to exhibit quite differently from the parent virus, such as it could be more deadly, more transmissible. And then when that happens, the new variant, we call this a new strain, okay? Now, remember that, as I mentioned before, mutations happens not just for COVID, okay? Mutations happen for other viruses as well. It is part of their evolution. They mutate, they replicate, and they mutate in order to survive, okay? So as part of natural selection, it is constantly mutating. In fact, for COVID, the experts have predicted that there are mutations which occur at about 2 to 3 a month, okay? And as I mentioned before, why do they do that? It's really because they're evolving, okay? And the best thing that a smart virus would love to do is to mutate such that, number one, it doesn't kill the host, right? It doesn't want to be too deadly, because if it kills the host, it dies itself. But it hopes to achieve a kind of virus whereby it causes some damage, so it makes the host sick, but the host lives on. So it would like to have this kind of properties whereby it's a new mutation, but it's able to infect a lot of people, but don't kill the host. So that's what it likes the best. So in terms of mutations, I think there are 4 key mutations that are most commonly talked about or out in the public domain. Number 1 is the G614. This has been present since Q2 of last year, okay? And other key mutations are N501Y, and I'm sure you would have heard of the E484K. Otherwise, it has a nickname called the EEK mutation. Now, when viruses have these mutations, what actually happens is that it changes a little bit of the configuration of spike protein such that it is, so for a COVID virus to infect a host human cell, it enters the host human cell via a spike protein, okay? But when mutation happens, and usually these mutations affect the spike protein, it actually causes the spike protein, number 1, to be perhaps more open and flatter, allowing it to be able to enter into the host human cell, okay? Sometimes, and this is what N501Y does, and you also observe it with the G614 mutation as well. Now, the EEK mutation, on the other hand, actually helps the COVID virus evade antibodies, which is the host immune response, okay? So where are these key mutations found? They are found in the UK strain, so B117. They can also be found in the South African and the Brazilian strain, okay? And I'm sure you would have heard about these already. They were identified somewhere in the Q4 of 2020. And what are its potential impact? Well, certainly we have seen that it's more transmissible, okay? There are some studies that have already indicated that the UK strain could potentially be more deadly, right? Now, in terms of vaccine efficacy, we already have studies so to indicate that there is reduced vaccine efficacy for the UK strain and for the South African strain for some of the vaccines that are already available, in particular the Pfizer, the Moderna vaccine. As for the Brazilian strain, I think there are more studies that are needed before we can really confirm whether or not the vaccine is going to be effective against ineffective or reduce efficacy against the Brazilian strain. But given that it shares the same mutation as the South African strain, we anticipate its behavior to be quite similar to the South African strain, okay? So mutations, these spike mutations, when they're associated with new strains, see what happens. It is always associated with new clusters of COVID cases, yeah? All across Europe, Australia as well, and South Africa, Brazil. In the Philippines, have you had any of these strains? So this is published sometime in mid-March. At that point in time, there was one identified case of the Brazilian strain there were 59 cases of the UK strain and 32 cases of the South African strain. Okay. So what does all this mean for us? Certainly, new strains, new mutations means we always worry about increased transmissibility, possibly more severe illness, possible vaccine reduced vaccine efficacy. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the COVID vaccines. As of 3rd of April, we have exceeded about more than 637 million doses of vaccines in all. The most widely distributed vaccines are the AstraZeneca, Pfizer, and Moderna. Okay, as you can see. Now, now there are some Asian countries, some other countries within Asia that they actually do use Cyanobac as well as Sputnik. Okay. Now, this is a quick update as to how Asia has been faring in terms of the COVID vaccine rollout. So as of March 2021, we've had about 600 million, as of March, 608 million total doses administered globally. This is as of March, okay? Now, I'm going to bring you to, in Asia, if you look at the third row, the third row is the percentage of population that's fully vaccinated and vaccination launch date. So overall in Asia, most of the countries, the vaccination launch date, the earliest was in January this year, okay? Most of the countries within Asia, the percentage of population that's fully vaccinated did not exceed 10%. So we're looking at a range of, less than 0.1% to Singapore 6.6%, Indonesia 1.5%, and in the Philippines, as of March, there's been about 739,000 doses of vaccines administered, okay? The daily rate of doses being used are about 25,000, okay? Percentage of population that's fully vaccinated, less than 0.1, and percentage of population that the available shots can cover, we're looking at about 1.2%, okay? Based on what we know, currently, the Philippines have got Cyanovac and AstraZeneca. But beyond Cyanovac and AstraZeneca, what else is in the pipeline? Well, the Philippines has granted EUA approval for Pfizer and BioNTech as well. And at the same time, the Russian Sputnik vaccine, okay? Now, this was a slide that I obtained from the Philippines Department of Health website. I wasn't able to obtain information as to when the Sputnik vaccine will become available, but certainly the Pfizer vaccine has already arrived in the Philippines, yeah? Okay, now I'm going to end. This is my last slide. In case you need additional information about COVID vaccination in the Philippines, this is a website that you could refer to, which may help address some of your questions. Okay, over to you, Dr. Leong.
And continue on from where Dr. Ling Li Min has started. I think Dr. Ling has done a very good job in giving us a view of the COVID situation, as well as the variants. The variants are very important. You will notice in the Q&A, people are really asking, what about the Philippines variants? We'll try to address that afterwards. So we're going to talk a little bit about vaccines and what are the side effects of the vaccines. Now, the good news is, if you had a vaccine in the past, then COVID-19 vaccine is very similar. Perhaps it's going to be a little bit more painful after the jab. The pain is not from the injection, but rather from the immune reaction that happens thereafter. So the immune reaction will occur at the site, and then thereafter you could have a bit of fever, body aches, chills, as if you are starting to fall sick. That's because your body is training up how to fight the virus. Now, this is fine. Don't worry about it, because in truth, if you do have these symptoms, it tells you that your immunity is training up, and this is good. So a little bit of training, a little bit of hardship on your body is fine, because when the real virus comes along, you'll be very, very well covered. What are some of the reactions to the vaccines? I'm going to illustrate this one on Pfizer BioNTech, because it's one of the vaccines that better studied. The other one is Moderna. In truth, they are very, very similar because both of them are actually mRNA vaccines. Now, this is actually a report that's published in February 19, 2021. And like many things in COVID, after 2 months, all the science becomes a little bit dated. But in this case, it is still very relevant. Now, so what happens is about 30 million doses were administered in this 1 month period from the 14th of December to 13th of January. And they did what you call passive reporting. That means if you don't, it will go according to what the patient reports to the doctor. The doctor doesn't go for active surveillance and call up everyone. It depends on the patient presenting back to the doctor. And that figure came out to be 0.05%, which means 99.95% of the people didn't have any complaints about it. Overall, the serious events was 0.0046, which is 4.6 per 10,000. When we say serious, this includes someone who had a faint, had a giddiness. It could be just simply from the fear of having an injection or because the person forgot to take breakfast or lunch that day and he felt very unwell after the vaccine. Not so much because of the vaccine issues. What happens after the vaccination is that you have some pain here initially, then the pain will get better and better and better. And in turn, you actually have some antibody response. But if you have a second dose, then you have more pain down here, but the good news, it gets better and better and better. So the point is, pain that comes is not long lasting. After a while, it will recover. And then you get more and more antibody build up as the pain reactions. And you all know the phrase, no pain, no gain. And then if you have a booster dose, you're going to have a booster gain and you get a booster defense. Okay, so what are some of the risks involved? First dose, you have a bit of pain. Second dose, more pain. And the booster dose, you actually have a booster immune reaction. What are some of the dangers? The truth is anaphylaxis. Anaphylaxis, that means having a severe reaction to the vaccine for the first time. What's the real risk? The real risk is actually quite low. The COVID vaccine comes out to be about 4.5 cases per million. In the case of Moderna, it's about 2 cases per million. But if you look at influenza vaccine, you look at pneumococcal vaccine, you look at shingles vaccine, they are also in the region. Which means if you ever have had any vaccines in the past, then you have been exposed to the same kind of risk as this. What's the danger and risk of vaccines? It's about 4 to 9. And you think about it, the risk of road death in Singapore is about 21 per million. So my favorite line, which I ask my Singaporeans are, did you cross the road today? You did. Did you drive today? Were you in the car today? Were you in public transport today? Yes, you were. Then your risk of dying is actually 21 per million, which is much higher than the COVID vaccine. If you're worried about crossing the road, why should you be worried about taking the COVID vaccine? Okay, rather, if you're not worried about crossing the road, why should you be worried about getting a COVID vaccine? Or I have many patients who smoke. If you smoke, you die at risk of 2,480 per million. So if you smoke, then all the more you should get the vaccine because you are taking a higher risk. And indeed, if you are a smoker, you're more likely to get problems associated with COVID-19. Anaphylaxis is the biggest concern. It is a bad allergic reaction. So we do recommend people to sit down the vaccine site after the injection because we do observe most of the reactions occur with 30 minutes. So if you're fine after 30 minutes, you should be okay. Some of the questions which we'd like to ask is, should I get the COVID-19 vaccine I had COVID-19 before? The answer is yes, you should. Okay, the simple reason is this. You have to follow my hands here. If you get a COVID-19 infection, you have antibodies rising up. But these antibody levels are not very high, and with time, it will come down. So, but if you had COVID-19 infection, then you go for COVID-19 vaccination, your antibodies will be even higher. At such a high level, it will protect you against other infections. Now, you also realize that as the antibody levels fall, you are prone to infections again. If you had one natural infection, then you had a COVID-19 vaccination, your levels will be much higher now, and then it takes a longer time to fall, and then the chance of you getting COVID-19 again will be lesser. So the risk of COVID-19 infection seems to be related to the antibody levels. The lower the antibody levels, the greater the risk. Or in other words, the higher the antibody levels, the better protection. Sorry, I just had a cough there for a while. We don't understand how long the duration is, and then there be cases of reinfection when the numbers fall. Now I'm going to show you this Denmark study, which actually look at the risk of infection, after a COVID-19 case. And this actually look at a population-wide throughout whole Denmark. And when you look at a previous positive reaction, if you ever had positive PCR before, your risk of getting is 0.65. If you never had a PCR positive before, then your risk is 3.27%. So your relative risk is about 0.195 or about 19.5% risk of getting COVID-19 again. But if you look at the overall numbers, you're talking about 1 in 10,000. So the overall risk is very, very low per person. But compared to someone who has not been infected, then you have some protection. The protection comes out to be about 80%. So Denmark protection is 80.5%. So in the case of COVID-19 infections in healthcare workers, this is a healthcare study. The regular COVID PCR test is done every 2 to 4 weeks in this hospital staff. So you actually do pick up asymptomatic infection. And overall, the risk of infection, reinfection risk comes out to be about 17%. So if you look at the UK staff protection, it's about 83%. You have the Denmark protection about 80.5%. So overall, you have about 15 to 20% risk of getting infected again. Remember, the actual risk is much smaller because the numbers who actually get infected are smaller. Will the COVID vaccine prevent me from infecting the other people? Well, unfortunately, no. Because after getting the vaccine, I will be prevented from dying from it, from getting the severe form of it, which is good. For the individual perspective, is good. But the protection is not good and is not long-lasting, and it doesn't protect you against mild diseases, which means I may have asymptomatic disease, and in turn, I can still spread on to other people. But it certainly reduces the risk of you falling sick, and then when the numbers come down, the risk of you falling sick comes down, the risk of you passing on to others will come down, but it is not zero. We do think that even if you fall sick after a vaccine, the risk of you being severe is low. You are likely to have just a mild disease. And when you have a mild disease, we have seen the patients with vaccines, the amount of viruses inside the nose are much lower. We think the lower risk of transmission. Who should not get vaccinated? Well, basically, if you have a severe allergy of one sort, which is anaphylaxis. This is especially true for the Pfizer vaccine. For the other vaccines like AstraZeneca, as well as the Cyanobac, it's no major issues. You can take it. But since you have anaphylaxis in the past, you may have anaphylaxis again. So during the vaccination, after the vaccination, I will need to observe you for 30 minutes to make sure you're fine. Now I'm going to go into a little bit about the different vaccines that are available. We've got the Pfizer BioNTech at least a point available now, which is the mRNA vaccines. You need 2 doses. And they are really the top-notch vaccines with very high 94.1 to 95% efficacy. The other vaccines have not been able to achieve this. But the biggest problem with this is some people do get allergic reactions to it in the order of about 4 per million. So if you have no allergies, you're going to be just fine. This is actually the other slide showing the other vaccines. We have the ChAdOx vaccine. The ChAdOx vaccine is actually for AstraZeneca and Oxford. This is the one that is AstraZeneca. And I hear that people have been getting it in Philippines, but there's an issue in getting the second dose. If you can't get the second dose, then you're a little bit of a dilemma. The first dose is kind of wasted. Then the second dose, you don't have it, you don't have long-lasting immunity. After getting the first dose, you should get the vaccine in 2 to 3 months, after which the antibody levels may fall and may not have effective transmission. We think it is effective in up to 82% of the time. We're not too sure how good and how effective it is against the variants. For the common wild type, the one that first came out from China, the one that's spreading initially last year, the beginning of last year, no issues. But the variants, be it the Philippines variants or the B117 variants, the B17 variants are fine, the B1351 may be an issue, but we don't know yet. Again, it's 82% effective. The next one is Janssen, which does Johnson & Johnson. I like it because it's actually one dose, but you realize that one dose of vaccine, the efficacy is not very good in the region of 60 to 72%. Novavax is a vaccine that just announced the results about 2 months to 3 months ago. It's shown to be very, very effective. It just uses a spike protein with an adjuvant added in at 96%. You have the CoronaVac or the Cyanobac vaccine. It seems to work quite well. Then it has a wide-ranging efficacy. Now, the reason why it's wide-ranging is because for the mild diseases, it is only about 50% effective. But for the severe diseases or death, it's about 90 to 100% effective. And of course, we have the Russian Sputnik. From the published data, the efficacy is very good, about 91.6%. They use 2 doses for the vaccine to be effective. Again, this is just a vaccine efficacy against the different strains. You see the B117 and B1351 as well as the P1. Now, we hear about the Philippines strains. The Philippines strains has the same mutations as the South African strain and the B117. So if the vaccine works for the B117 and the B1351, it should be able to work for the Philippines strain as well. Again, we have the best efficacy in terms of Pfizer and Moderna. And between the last time this slide was presented to new data, the Pfizer-BioNTech says that they have, through a press media report, not published data, press media report saying that it is efficacious against the South African strain. How did the mRNA vaccine work? Just very quickly. Now, the mRNA is actually just a messenger. It's literally like a cookbook. You throw to the kitchen what you want to cook, and then the kitchen will make exactly the same thing what it does. But it doesn't messes up the brains of the cook. The brains of the cook is in the nucleus, and the mRNA vaccine doesn't go inside and doesn't change anything. Dr. Ling and myself have had the COVID-19 vaccine by Pfizer, and you realize that we don't have 2 horns growing out our head. That means it doesn't change. Actually, I would love to look a little bit more like the Korean pop stars. Then my girls and my daughters would actually appreciate me more. But it don't. I'm still the same balding old man who's growing older every day. So the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine just also gives the instructions, what proteins to do, and the proteins come out and then release it. So previously, we were given the spike protein to the arm, but this time around, we asked the body to make the spike protein. In other words, it is exactly the same methodology. But the amount of spike protein that's delivered is so much that the body has a very good immune response to it. It goes through the cell, makes a protein, and then it comes out and the body recognizes it. Do the QR code scanning down here. Here's a lovely video. It shows you how it works. I want to stress again, it doesn't enter the nucleus. It does exactly what you ask it to do. Only very, very small amount of additives are there to stabilize the RNA. It is actually very transient. Then the AstraZeneca vaccine, which some of you have received, actually uses the chimpanzee adenovirus. It is a carrier, will take the DNA into the cell, and in turn the cell will then make the spike proteins. So it's quite similar, but it uses the adenovirus to transport it there. It's a modified chimpanzee virus, so it cannot grow on its own. Even if you swallow it, you will not turn into a chimpanzee, or you will not have runny nose from it because it just doesn't replicate. But eventually, again, it makes the cell which it invades spike protein the way it wants it to do. Cyanobac vaccine is really very traditional. It's very old school. They get a virus, they kill it, they added a bit of sauces, spices, chili sauce to it to make it more tasty for the immune system. The body responds to it, and in turn, then you have mounts a very powerful immune response to it. This is very old school, and you realize that all the big manufacturers don't use this method because the amount of antibody that's generated is not a lot. Number two, it's really very effortful to actually grow out the virus. If you make a mistake, you can have a lab disaster. So it's potentially dangerous to the people who work at the vaccine companies. So in general, we don't like this old school method because it's not effective, it's dangerous to manufacture, and it is slow to do so. But nonetheless, I admit that it's old school, it will work, but perhaps the effectiveness isn't too good. Sputnik vaccine from Russia is very similar to the AstraZeneca vaccine. Again, they use a vector to put the protein into the DNA into the cell and in turn get the DNA to make up the proteins. Again, they use adenovirus, but they use a human adenovirus, two types. One is actually 5 and one is actually 26. You need 2 doses to make it very, very effective. So coming back, the vaccine, is it effective against the variants? The B117 variant, yes, it is effective. It's less effective in the 135 ones. The P1, P2 variants or the Philippine variants, we think the vaccine will work because it carries the same mutation. It's just called P1, P2 because it came out from the Philippine side. The Brazilian side. You call that the 135 because it comes from the South African side. But at the end of the day, all these viruses and mutants have a convergence mutation. They're all getting the same mutations on its own by chance. But overall, the vaccine seems to work, but the efficacy is not as good as it was before. You can trust it, but you're more likely to get a little bit of symptoms. Why should I take the vaccine? Simple. I want to protect myself. I don't want to fall sick because I can affect my family and in turn the rest of my workplace as well. I want to protect my family because I don't want them to fall sick. Now, those people who cannot be vaccinated, they need to be protected. Because you can think of it, if the waves come in, I'll spread myself and pass it on when I move on. But if there are a lot of layers of people who are before, they will in turn block the infection. So let's say there's one person you want to protect is here, but the 3 persons in front have had vaccinations. This 3 can actually block the transmission, and in turn the 4th person who cannot be vaccinated will be protected. Now at the end of the day, we want to get back to some normalcy. We are inching towards it. Okay, it's a little bit of a rush. We've gone a little bit beyond 2 o'clock. I welcome any questions. I'm really sorry that we have not been able to address many of your questions. I see them coming out fast and furious. We'll try to address them as quickly as possible. The link is going to look at the chat. There are some questions coming out from the chat, and Dr. Ling can try to address those while I address some of those which are brought up by Ms. Dorothy Aquino. So very simply, if you have 1 dose before of the AstraZeneca and you have problems getting the 2nd dose, it's not ideal because you waste 1 vaccine. So if possible, wait for the 2nd AstraZeneca. If you can't wait, and I'm talking about 2 to 3 months. Why 2 to 3 months is because your antibody levels will fall. By about the 3rd month, the amount of antibodies you have is no longer protective. So by the 2nd or 3rd month, if you don't have your antibody, you haven't had your vaccine yet, then you just take whatever is available. Now, there are no studies to say that if you switch one to switch the other one to switch the other one, it's going to be a problem. But it's also there are no studies to say that I could eat some Western food first, then I'm going to eat some Filipino food, then I'm going to eat some Chinese food. So there will be no studies to tell you that at this point in time because it's not being evaluated. But logically, you will know that if I take the Western food first, followed by the Filipino food, followed by Chinese food, it should be okay. Because again, it trains the body to fight the immune system. So if you have no choice, then you need to get a new one, then go for the new vaccine for the 2 doses. In theory, you should work beautifully. In theory, you should still have very good antibody response to it. So there are other questions about, is there any condition which you cannot take? No, not really. Practically all conditions you can take, unless you're known to be allergic to a content inside the vaccine. But most of the vaccines, you'll be the first time there is. So practically all conditions you can take. Now, we worry about cancer patients, not so much because the cancer patients are at risk of getting infection. It's rather they may not mount the immune response. Because the immunity is so poor, even if I do give a jab here, there may not be adequate antibodies. If there are no adequate antibodies, why waste the vaccine on the person? But instead, give it to somebody else instead. Wait for the person's chemotherapy to finish, then you get the vaccine. So the way to ask is, doctor, for my cancer or for my treatment, does it weaken my immune system to the extent that I will fall sick more easily or I cannot mount the immune response? If the answer is yes, then you should actually hold the vaccination until the treatment is over. If the answer is no, then it's fine. I'm going to digress a little bit. One of the very common drugs which we use is actually steroids. Steroids, if you are using prednisolone as a marker, if you are using 30 milligrams and below, certainly, clearly, you have no problems in getting the vaccine and you'll be okay. So we do have asked how long does the vaccine last? We don't know yet because the vaccine hasn't been around for more than 6 months. But if you look at the trajectory, how much you come down, it's like if I have this amount of money in my bank, if I don't do anything to it, then it's going to come down slowly. So at about 18 to 24 months, we think the antibody levels will fall, and you may need to get a booster vaccine. So there are different conditions like diabetes, high cholesterol, all those, they'll be fine. You can take it. There are people who had vaccine and thereafter got a second dose. Before they get the second dose, he gets infected again. They ask, do I need the second dose? Yes, you do need the second dose. And for the second dose, I will wait for about 3 months from the infection before you go for it. So I'm going to try to look at
There was someone that asked about when can they have the flu vaccination after the COVID vaccine. Usually, I think the advice would be wait at least 2 weeks. I mean, certainly, I think there's no studies to say that you can't take them all together. We have had people that would take 4 to 5 different types of vaccines in one setting. But the fear, I guess, is this. If you have many vaccinations given on the same day, you may expect more pain, more aches and pains, and there might be a chance of much higher chance of having fever. But if you stagger your vaccines out, then it's really to minimize the soreness that you get when you have all your vaccines stuck all on the same day. So wait at least 2 weeks.
Sorry, I have to advance. I'd like to advance 2 questions. These were all actually posted in the chat box or in the Q&A. And these are 2 issues, raging issues here in the Philippines right now. Number 1, since we started already the vaccinations, there's a lot of apprehension about the availability of the same vaccine that will be given to you. The question is, for instance, some started with AstraZeneca, and then right after the beginning of the vaccination, there were reports that there are problems on the supply. So they're worried about the second. Can you mix? So the first question is, can you mix the vaccines? You took AstraZeneca and then get Cyanobac after. So that's the first question. And another raging question in the Philippines right now is the issue about, not about vaccines, but because of the uncertainties in the supply of vaccines, people are talking about ivermectin. They'd like to know your comments about using ivermectin both as a prophylaxis and as a treatment. Thank you, Dr. Leong, Dr. Lin.
Okay, maybe I...
Give me the answer.
Okay, so maybe I'll take the one about whether or not you can mix and match the vaccine. So I have to say that we are not going to have any studies on whether or not you can mix and match your vaccine. So say your first one is Moderna, and then or Pfizer, and then your second, or AstraZeneca, and your second one is Cyanobac, because there's been no access to the first vaccine. So logistically, I mean, not logistically, logically or theoretically, if you think about it, we had got the mechanism of vaccination is such that it trains your body to mount an immune response. So by giving them the second dose, it's to retrain your body so that the second bursts of immune response will be much faster and much quicker. And that's the purpose of the second dose, right? Now, if there wasn't any vaccine access issues, I would actually say, please don't mix and match your vaccines. Go with the same vaccine as the first one. But I think in a setting whereby you have no choice, right? You know you need to go for the second dose, but you have no choice at all. You're forced or compelled to go for something else. Then I think go for that something else, the second one, because otherwise you may have nothing. That's how I feel about it. Dr. Leong?
I totally agree with Dr. Ling. You should try to use back the same one so that you don't waste the first dose. If you really have no choice and it really becomes not available, let's say the manufacturers say, we realize there's a problem, we're going to ban it and no further use. In that case, just go for the next vaccine, the other two which you have, go for routine. Now, chances are, scientifically, it should work beautifully.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, may I just address one question? I thought someone asked about this viral escapes, the anonymous attendees. Viral escapes, if you take the vaccine, it's going to mutate against it, etc. Now, I'm going to share this with you, and there's some truth in what they say. There's some truth in what you say. You see, when all of us try to put up barriers to something, okay, it's just like when we're little children, our parents will say, we put up a barrier, you can't go out and play at this time. I, as a person, will think of ways to overcome the barrier and continue playing. So the same thing happens to the virus. If we wear masks and the virus says, I can't get transmitted, I will adapt to be more transmissible. Now, then if they say, I put a 14 days incubation period, and then the virus will say, I will adapt and make sure my incubation period is longer, up to 21 days. So there is some truth is the more barriers there are, the virus will try to mutate and adapt. Because the virus is only interested in one thing, world domination, not just in Singapore, not just in Philippines, but the entire world. And not only that, they want to infect you again and again and again. They want to put you under the tyranny of repeated infections. So then why are we doing the vaccines? Number one, we want to protect deaths. Okay, we don't want people to die. Yes, when you put out the vaccines, you're putting up a barrier, the virus will try to mutate. But I'm going to save lives at the end of the day. I mean, my parents have told me this before I became a doctor. Ho Nam, if you can save one person's life, you have done a lot of good. So if I were to give vaccines to so many people and I save at least 1% of the people who have been vaccinated, I would have done a lot of good. That's number one. So be it vaccines, etc., that they put up barriers, at the end of the day, vaccines alone will not work. It's very silly to say that vaccines alone will work. You need vaccines plus people to mask up. Vaccines, people to mask up, and people to have safe distancing. When the vaccines are out, people are protected, number one. Then when you have your mask and social distancing and you have your lockdowns, then the virus cannot replicate. When the virus cannot replicate, there's no chance to form mutations. Mutations happen because each one of us became very individualistic. Each of us wanted to go out without masks. Each of us wanted to have good time without masks. And when we do that kind of sabotage to our own human race, the virus turns happy because it goes into world domination. Okay, look at Taiwan, look at South Korea, look at Thailand earlier, Vietnam, Singapore is not too bad now. We stop the virus transmission in the country. When that happens, there's no replication. If there's no replication, there can be no mutation. So if you imagine the same rule applies to all countries all over the world, including our China. and China, USA, Brazil. No replications at all, very effective. Everyone plays ball and everyone's get vaccinated. And by the time we take off the mask, the virus has no chance to mutate because it has to have millions of mutations before they can actually succeed in one successful leap across the vaccine. So coming back, the summary is this: you're right, variants will appear and they'll overcome it. So vaccines alone, it is a definite failure. You need vaccines, you need masks, you need social distancing. And I can tell you, you are right, I'm very fearful. If the whole world doesn't play it right together, if the whole world doesn't get the act together in terms of vaccines, if the whole world doesn't do masks and social distancing, guess what? They'll be beyond COVID-19. There will be COVID-21, COVID-23, COVID-25, because the virus wants world domination and repeated infection again and again and again.
All right, thank you, Dr. Nam. Okay, we have another question from our audience. Is it necessary to get blood antibody test for COVID before getting vaccine so that if one has antibody level beyond 10, someone told him to take vaccine? Yeah. Please advise. Is it necessary?
Actually, no. So the quick answer is that you do not need the antibody you do not need to do blood tests for antibody levels to get the vaccination.
All right.
Also, another question on ivermectin. I think just now this was asked twice on ivermectin. So, continuing on from what Dr. Leong had said about we need masking, we need social distancing. Sorry, I don't want to be a nag, not meant to be, but really, if we are even considering ivermectin at all, then we really honestly need to mask, social distance, hand hygiene, and vaccinations. These are the key over ivermectin, because I think, really the ivermectin data is very inconclusive. So you're better off masking up, staying at home, keeping a distance, not mixing around, vaccinating ourselves if we have and are able to, rather than taking ivermectin to prevent COVID. That's how I feel. Yeah,
I totally agree. Just to add in very quickly, I've always had problems getting my patients to start on medications, be it diabetes or hypertension or antibiotics. Tell me, please don't. So mask works. Social distancing works. I don't need to take the drug ivermectin. I don't have to risk side effects of the drug, the long-term usage of it. So mask, good mask. I'm not talking about something flimsy as thin as a negligee, but good mask and a good social distancing really works. And if the whole world works together, we can overcome COVID-19 100 days earlier.
All right, thank you, doctors. We'll get another one question. How come other patients become long carrier? They persistently comes positive for months in PCR, even if asymptomatic. Are they infectious carriers? How do you manage this?
Well, I think that depends on, so why did they get the swab to begin with? Was it because they were a contact of a COVID patient, or was it because they had symptoms? So if they had symptoms like sore throat, runny nose, fever, and they were PCR positive, then they are infectious and they need to be isolated, or stay in a facility, or go to a hospital if they were unwell. But if they were, say, a contact, so they had been in close contact with a COVID patient, but they are asymptomatic, and then when they got themselves swabbed, their PCR is positive. Now, if the viral load, so a contact of a COVID patient has got a swab that is positive. Now, if the viral load of the swab is very low, that means that that person has got active, is newly infected, and is infectious. However, if their viral load is very high, then it could be that it's not a new infection. They may have got infected from COVID sometime in the past 2 to 3 weeks.
All right, thank you, Dr. Min. Okay, for our last question, I think I think we have covered all the questions. So after being fully vaccinated, what are the possible things that we can do now, doctors?
Keep going on, putting on the mask.
Like,
Like
can
I
we
said,
go now to our travel domestically now because we're vaccinated already, or we can visit our relatives already? Are we safe then?
Yeah, hold on. Dr.
Okay,
Leong, Dr.
I
Leong.
don't, unfortunately, yes, we can visit relatives, but still continue your mask and social distancing. You see, the world, your country is not safe until the world is safe. So, which means all of us must work together, including getting all the countries with vaccines. The issue number one. The second thing which I would rather focus on is, if you had the vaccine, then I want to congratulate you for two things. Number one, you have protection. Number two, and then you can fly. Some countries are going to start having vaccine passport. You can go for holidays, but with mask on. The second thing I congratulate you is that you won't die, because the vaccines, you may fall a little bit sick, but you won't die. So this is great news. But if you're armed and you have knowledge of this good awareness, then you need to take it one step forward. You need to go forth with this knowledge and this awareness and spread the good news that the vaccine will save life. The vaccine is safe. Again, your whole country is not safe until everyone in your country is protected. And after the Philippines is protected, we need the rest of the world to be protected. Then we can literally say goodbye to COVID-19. Honestly, I don't have faith in so human beings. I think we are too individualistic, we are too self-centered, and I think we have really lost the battle to COVID-19. Prove me wrong. Prove me that there is still something worth in human nature to fight for.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much, doctors. I think that's the our last question. I think we've covered all the questions and you've answered already directly to our audience. Thank you. Is there anything else that you want to cover, or is there anything else that you want to say, Dr. Min, before we end this part?
No, I'd just like to, I'd like to thank all of you for organizing this, for having us on board. It's been a wonderful session. I hope that we have all learned from each other, and I also like to express that I'd like to wish everyone to keep safe, okay, to hang in there. We have been through the worst last year, and my hope is that now that we know more about COVID, now that we have vaccination, yes, even though the access may not be and supplies are not so reliable at times, but we also know we have masking now and we've got greater awareness. So my hope is that actually things can only get better, because last year we started with nothing. This year we're starting with so many more things, right? Knowledge, technology, social distancing. Dr. Leong?
Yes, Dr. Nam? Yeah, is there anything else that you want to?
Actually, there's Rosa wants to ask a very quick question. We'll wait for Rosa to answer. Very quickly, I want to thank you guys coming forward to listen to this. When you come and listen to this, it tells me you're interested in healthcare. You're interested in the truth. You don't want to listen to fake news or stuff coming from QAnon. We had too much of that. And I really appreciate you asking these questions. And I think they are very relevant questions. In fact, I do enjoy the questions very much because they are very intelligent, well thought out, thinking questions. So Philippines, I love you. I think you are a fabulous nation. And the questions which you tell me, it tells me one thing. You have the resources, you have the vaccines, and you have the people to overcome this COVID pandemic.
Thank you so much, doctors. Thank you, Dr. Nam and Dr. Min. Again, thank you very much, everyone. We appreciate you being here today. We'll see you again next time.